When Japan beat Ireland, I sent Jamie Joseph a text like in the hour, and I'm sure a million other people did, but I just said, honestly, like, thank you so much for what you've just done for us, because they provided a shortcut in an arena where you don't have shortcuts. Like, shortcuts are never given to you in terms of inspiring a team to belief. I'm Lesley McKenzie, and welcome to the Rugby Hive. Lesley McKenzie desu, konnichiwa, Rugby Hive, yokoso.
Today's guest is Lesley McKenzie. Capped 25 times for Canada, she represented her country at 2 Rugby World Cups. She then transitioned into coaching, working in Canada, New Zealand and Japan. She was the assistant coach with the Japanese Women's Sevens program at the 2018 Rugby World Cup Sevens in San Francisco, before taking over the head coach role for the Japanese Women's 15 side. In today's episode, we talk about growing up in the mountains in Fort Nelson in Canada. We chat about how she got started playing rugby, transitioning to international coaching, her time in New Zealand, the legacy of Rugby World Cup 2019, and her current role in Japan. Here is Canadian legend Lesley McKenzie.
He's so dangerous! Freddy Krueger has nightmares about him!
Hello and welcome to the Rugby Hive. I'm Dallen Stanford, and despite my South African accent, I was fortunate enough to play rugby for the United States on the Sevens World Series.
And I'm MacDowell, a former Canadian Sevens international. Back in my playing days, I went head-to-head against Dallen in the USA.
For several years, Robin has coached international sevens for various countries, including Canada and Mexico. He's massively passionate about growing the game across the Americas through his MacDowell rugby programs at all levels. I'm currently a commentator for World Rugby, most recently broadcasting the Rugby World Cup in Japan, as well as the amazing Sevens World Series.
More than a decade later, we are teaming up to bring you insights from legendary players and coaches from around the world.
All legends have a story. The Rugby Hive podcast is here to share it.
Welcome to the Hive.
Oh, he's more dangerous than climate change!
Hello and welcome to episode 19. This week we head to Japan for a wonderful chat with Women's 15's head coach Lesley McKenzie. She's had such a fascinating journey, always open to opportunities and choosing a wide path for her adventures. She's leading the Japanese rugby into a new arena, one that doesn't shy away from the physical nature of the game. And it all started with 15 Cups of Java with you, Robin.
Honored to work with Lesley earlier in my coaching days while I was living in Vancouver, and kind of got my university coaching debut with Lesley. Lesley was the head coach of the UBC Women, now one of the top programs in the country. And we'd have a pre-session coffee all the time. I reconnected with Lesley because she was living in New Zealand for a number of years after her coaching term at UBC, and she coached all over that country and transitioned into her opportunity, getting involved originally as a forwards coach with the Japanese Women's Sevens. So we caught up at the 2018 World Cup, which was kind of cool for a couple small town British Columbia kids to be coaching on that stage and working with different countries, which was unique. And then one thing that I really loved about this episode, and one thing I love about Lesley, she coaches like she played, Dallen. And I watched her play both for the University of BC, but also for Canada. She was a hard-nosed hooker, and she leads from the front. And that's why they got that hard-nosed Canadian involved originally with Japan. And obviously the Japanese culture, much like coaching the Mexican women culture, very respectful, not super aggressive, but very coachable. So Lesley kind of is driving that into them as far as, putting your head first and getting after. But she's also leading on a number of fronts for international women. Right now, Rugby Americas North is doing a lot of promotion for the women's game and Conquer Her. So we thought we'd feature Lesley this week.
Yeah, and look forward to seeing Rugby World Cup 2021. And we'll have, of course, your side, my side. We even will have my home country, South Africa, playing, Japan and everything. It's all going to go down. And I know the draw takes place this Friday to see which teams will play which sides. And you've been doing some work as well with the national Canadian 15 side.
Yeah, every Sunday, the regional group in BC and more specifically on Vancouver Island have been putting in work. Pretty exciting to see the talent, of course, showing up at 8 a.m. in Victoria in the rain and the wind. But even more impressive, the amount of Canadian women, and mainly French-Canadian women, that François Ratier and his coaching colleagues have set up for success in France. I think there's 47 women playing professionally in Europe right now. So we'll be coming at you in 2021, Dallen.
Well, it's Women's Week here in the USA, and together with the Women's Eagles, they've had an 8-week preparation cycle ahead of that World Cup we mentioned. They're playing a couple of scrimmage matches this week. It's called Stars v Stripes, and they'll take place on Wednesday, November 18, Saturday, November 21. All 49 players of the squad getting a chance to shine. And Robin, it's been 7 months, and I'm thrilled to finally be calling the live action at Infinity Park in Glendale, Colorado. And that'll be on Flow Rugby for everyone to watch. It takes place at the new home of USA Rugby, the Rugby Town National Training Center. And Verity, my missus, and she will finally get a break from hearing me commentate live just around the house.
I can't wait to listen to you, and I'm really happy that rugby's back on in the States and thrilled for those girls to be competing. I'll be tuning in to hear you sing all weekend.
And speaking of singing, my friend, Argentina, their time in the sun. And one of our future guests was the commentator on this historic call, 25-15, that beat the All Blacks. There's a new shirt inspired, Nobody Beats Argentina 29 times in a row. And Andrew Swain was our man on the call. What an historic weekend.
Just love the excitement and the passion from the South American team. I know from the World Sevens series playing against Argentina, it's one thing we always modeled as a sevens program is to play like them. They're not the biggest team, but they outwork teams and their self-belief. But how about the story about them not playing games in 2020 and going up against these super rugby players that have played North-South and have obviously played a number of test matches? Pretty inspiring. With no game preparation, have gone out and slayed a dragon.
It really was one of those results. We obviously mentioned in the pod as well how when Japan beat South Africa at the Rugby World Cup in 2015, how that changed the way people saw Japanese rugby, the way other nations were inspired by it. And the same thing here with Argentina. We knew when they joined the Rugby Championship that things would eventually change for them. They've always been such a competitive nation. Sevens, they've had some brilliant seasons. Santiago Gomez-Cora, one of our favorite Argentine players, but he had to do it in 15s against the All Blacks. And that's the thing about New Zealand too, as you mentioned, they've been playing rugby every weekend. They've been playing some marvelous games. Obviously, we're beaten by Australia as well, which is superb for our Aussie friends. But this result really is right up there.
Yeah, I bumped into Jamie Cudmore yesterday while his son was playing some rookie rugby at West Shore here in Victoria, and Jamie was fired right up. And as an up and coming Canadian coach that's involved with the men's 15s in camp right now, it's a lot of motivation in their camp for us as a smaller rugby nation to climb our way back up in the top 10. I guess he talked with their coach in the middle of the night, I guess down under, and they were sinking a few jars. But he was sharing how they were literally doing training sessions, one guy at a time on Zoom calls in their backyards to get it done in sync. So I'm looking forward to those stories and hopefully a documentary that'll come up with all these kids and other athletes that are starved for rugby and missing their teammates and missing competition. Hopefully this is some motivation that against all odds, you can conquer all.
Yeah, speaking about against all odds and future documentaries, how's that mustache going? That is very impressive 2 weeks in.
Well, it speaks for itself right now. It's taking over my face. Those Mobros out there, I salute you. And next year, we'll make sure that the man, the myth, the rugby corner, Dallen Stanford will be supporting as well.
Where do we go to get more information, my friend?
Just look up my name on the Movember website or app, and the link will be on Rugby Hive on Facebook.
Absolutely sensational. Support for the Rugby Hive podcast is brought to you by Manscaped, who is the best in men's below-the-waist grooming. Manscaped offers precision-engineered tools for your family jewels.
Get 20% off and free shipping with the code RugbyHive at manscaped.com. Your balls will thank you.
That's right. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com and use the code RugbyHive. Keep the chains and shut the gates from us. Also, huge thank yous to our other partners, Gilbert Rugby Canada, Brand Marinade, and Focus Care Products. We've had a tremendous support this past week for our episode with Chris Wiles, so keep the good times rolling. And you can catch us on the interwebs at Rugby Hive on Twitter and Facebook, at My Rugby Hive on Instagram. Time now for episode number 19. Wow, another great honor. We have an international sensation calling in all the way from Japan. Lesley, welcome to the Rugby Hive.
Good morning. You prefaced that with something, I felt like there was going to be some realism in it, but I'm up. It's 7:47. I'm an international sensation.
We're going to make it work today. Now, a big question for you, of course. It's been a very difficult time period for everybody, but how are you and your Japanese side holding up during this time?
I've actually just finished yesterday afternoon. We wrapped up. It was a series of one-on-ones, and we did it with the entire long list. So We have about 70 in that group. We did about 68 player meetings on Zoom, which everybody's massively proficient at now. So like 30 minutes check in with everybody. It was something that you look at the next 2.5 weeks and go like, yeah, I've got this, I can do this. And then you sit at your laptop, and I guess everyone is experiencing that now. But I think for me, like just the variety of conversations that I had with girls I really hadn't had the chance to talk to yet, it was amazing. And being able to dig a little bit more in about their lives, like it wasn't necessarily about rugby check-ins, it was check-ins with them as people. It was cool. Like honestly, I hadn't even seen some of them since last February, like a year and a bit ago, when we hadn't had them to camp since then. But like just checking in as people has been really powerful. Loved it.
Yeah, there's been some good positives to come out of this as well, which is great. Tell us a bit more though. Where exactly are you based, and what's it been like living in Japan?
I live in Kumagaya, which is up and to the left of Tokyo in a province called Saitama. It's a agricultural bent to the province. It's quite flat, river running through it, some mountains further off in the distance, some wind, no matter if you're summer or winter, there's always wind. It prides itself as a rugby town. We actually had the fortune of being one of the host cities in the previous World Cup. So they are really into their rugby here as a culture. Like this town, it's been really bred through high school. Panasonic Wild Knights are about 45 minutes up the road in Ota. I moved here because the Sevens girls were centralized here at the start of 2019, and I came with that. So the Sevens aren't necessarily my project anymore, and they're rarely even based here because they're on the road a lot, but I live here and I brought the dog. So it's harder to move around when you have a black lab to cater for.
And what's your dog's name?
His name is Boy. I didn't name him. He came as a 3-year-old with the least imaginative name, but like fits in well with Good Boy. So yeah.
I think just about everybody we've had on here has had a dog in the background. So I got a puppy at my feet now, and Dallen's got some animals running around too.
That is so helpful. Like, honestly, for the last 2 years that I've been here, I wouldn't have been able to probably survive it mentally without him. So, like, he may cruise by, and he's got a big dog bark on him, but he just ate breakfast, so he'll probably be...
We're going to have to get some Rugby Hive leashes pumped out here.
I love that. That's so cool.
So let's go back to your hometown. I love that you're a small town big dreamer. We had Kayla Molesky from Williams Lake on a few weeks ago. Tell us some fun facts about Fort Nelson and your life growing up there.
I was going to say Williams Lake. I've got her beat. Like, Williams Lake is one of those places you can go and buy name brand jeans, possibly get braces. Like, you had to go to Fort St. John for that when you were growing up in Fort Nelson. So if anyone cares to have a look at a map, we're on every map. It's small enough, but it's surrounded by enough nothing that we usually make it in even to a world map. So maybe 3,000 people when I was growing up. My parents moved up from Vancouver. They're both Vancouver people. My dad was a high school teacher. My mom was a nurse at the hospital. So me and my brother grew up there. Basically free-range children, so not much organized sport going on for us. You know, fishing, camping, bit of hunting, bit of fort building, a lot of snow shoveling. And then Mom put her foot down when I think I was about 12. We moved down south. So that's when we ultimately hit the Kootenays and Nelson for my high school, which is when I was introduced to organized sport, like for real. And I got to play team sports for real, which is something that I really only saw on TV and movies prior to that. So tried everything. Obviously, you get introduced to something through gym class, but like basketball and volleyball were light years ahead of what I was just not capable. So I got into all the esoteric stuff. Like, I'd come home like, I'm rowing now. I'm playing field hockey. Like, hey, I've just started netball because you don't have to learn how to dribble. And now I'm trying rugby, except we don't have enough people for a team. So I actually didn't play a game until I was at the University of British Columbia, which I went for, obviously mostly for academics, but also intended to play field hockey there. So yeah, it was not something that I've been bred to the bone for rugby, like very much not at all.
A very North American approach to getting involved in rugby, play everything. And to give credit to UBC, they've long had a strong rugby program, but also long had a successful field hockey program too. Did you play field hockey there as well?
No, I didn't. And it's something I laughed about. Like, Hash Kanji is obviously a legend, and he had been coaching for so long when I was there at field hockey. he swears blind that he would have put me on the team had I showed up. But I know that I was very slash and burn. Like, I was very physicality first in my approach to a lot of things because it was the quickest way to the goal, like literally. So I feel like I would not have had the finesse to make it. But he reckons I would have got there eventually, like even if I had to redshirt for how many years until I got some appropriate skills. Luckily, no, I got mononucleosis. I couldn't play any sport for the first 6 months of my time at uni. And then by the time, dude, I put on the freshman, like, I'm not sure what, 15, definitely 15. And then waddled out in January to the rugby team because I saw a thing on the back of the gym door and I was like, yeah, that's probably going to have to be it for now. And then I never looked back because it was perfect.
See, I love those stories like that. So I grew up in South Africa, and as a baby, before I was even out of the womb, I was given a rugby ball, right? So it was completely different stories. That's why this is always fascinating. So what was your pathway like then, from that first experience to rugby to representing your country?
I've always really been in love with being good at things. So like, I've always been massively competitive, and it was a sport where everything sort of clicked and all the corners fit all the other corner pieces. Some of my attributes, like, you know, we laugh about going out and shoveling a driveway for 3.5 hours in the dark when it's, 4 p.m. Like, that stuff, you don't know what it does to you, but I've sort of like had occasion to think and laugh about how prepped I had been through my childhood to play that kind of 80-minute sport. And it sounds silly, but like, so many things do shape you into what you want to end up doing. So I played it at UBC for, I think it would have been 4 years before I made the Canadian Under-23 program. And I worked really hard. Like, I loved something that was such a challenge mentally and physically and intellectually. I loved the challenge of working to get good at that. And I also cracked up the other day when I was thinking, I didn't mention it in that talk I mentioned to you, but I won most improved 2 years in a row, and I kind of laughed the second year that I got it, because I did laugh the second year that I got it, because I just thought, like, how shit was I 2 years ago? So that's great. I love that. But I had some coaches and I had some teammates around me. And like you say, UBC is absolute cradle of rugby. It's one of them in Western Canada for sure. It's produced so many incredible athletes, male and female, and really impressive coaches in both sides of the program. I had Spencer Robinson as a coach when I was probably at my most maybe imaginative stage as an athlete, just thinking about where I could go to, and just needed somebody who could push me mentally into the space where I was ready to accept the challenges. And Spence, he'd been coaching Canada Sevens, and he was one of our coaches for Canada Under-23s that summer. Rick Suggett was the other one. And so between the two of them, like, you guys are both nodding, like, you can imagine what that would do for somebody who thrives on ambition, loves a challenge, and basically has enough naivety and gullibility to think that they can do anything really still at that stage. So it's a great sport for that, because there's just so much scope for hard work and passion and drive. And I'm far from being alone in somebody who had all of those things, but I loved being surrounded by people that were full of them. I actually talked to Spencer last week or the week before, where we were talking about the kind of women that surrounded us in that program in those years. And like, there's some top geologists, there's some scientists, there's doctors, there's entrepreneurs. Like, there's some freaking amazing people that have come out of that program. And it was just such a nexus for good brains and people that didn't mind hitting other people. Like, what a great environment.
That's the great thing about a particular sport of rugby, right? I mean, I haven't played many of the other North American sports, but the people around it make it so interesting, and what they get up to later. Talk through some of your actual highlights, your personal highlights playing for Canada. You know, I know you attended a few World Cups, is that right?
I was at the 2006 World Cup and the 2010 World Cup. And the 2006, it was held in Edmonton, so it was at home, and it had sort of the extra feature of not only being an overwhelming experience, meaningful experiences where everyone says to you what a meaningful experience this must be, but all your friends and family come attached. And like, it was lovely to have that home support. But I have to say, I was relieved when in 2010 we were overseas and we were somewhere else where we could just focus on the job. And I think I was an immature enough still athlete at the time. In 2006, I was 25. I didn't know exactly how to handle the extra pressure, and we weren't maybe adept enough at those conversations about how that would affect all of us. So that was a really interesting experience. And there were some moments that I loved around being with the team, and every moment that I get on the field, I love. Like, I'm never upset when I'm on the field, but at the same time, like, I would always temper that memory with what a massive thing to try and get through as a program. I really think that that's something that has spurred me as a coach to change my approach towards my coaching and my player preparation and my program prep. And then 2010 was in England. That was interesting for me because I'd spent a few months literally earlier that year in my bedroom, basically with the curtains shut, trying to get over a neck injury and concussion, and being in a bad mood, and reading the Twilight series because I couldn't watch television. Like, I couldn't see the flickering on the screen. And I think that even made it worse, to be honest. I read the whole set of bloody books and they're horrible. And that, like, I feel like a bit of a Debbie Downer when I talk about my World Cups, but both of them were such, we don't accept enough what big events can do to you as an athlete if they don't go well. And I think as a younger sport culture, especially maybe rugby in Canada, we weren't prepped yet to talk about how it could be really awful as well as it could be joyous. So, like, there was joy. And I played one of my best games ever, I believe, in the last game against the US, because when wouldn't you play your best game against the States, Rob? But, like, it was really interesting to look back and then just think, like, that was not what everyone says it is or thinks it is, but at the same time, it was quite formative, and it was something that you will think about as a player and as a coach now for years after that. So I'm sure there's people out there with great memories, and I have lots of them, but things that will shift and attack your perception of what it means to be an elite athlete if you're not ready for it, I think.
I went to the 2006 Commonwealth Games. There were 70,000 people in the Telstra Dome. I'd never been to a multi-sport game. Some athletes are, Canada set up, most countries are set up for it, where you go to the, the regional games,
right,
the BC Summer Games, and then the Western Canadian Games, and then the Canadian Summer Games, and it's the same all over the world.
Yeah.
So you've been to multi-sport, been to athletes' venues, you've dealt with crowds your whole life. I'd never been good at anything, never made anything. So when I went to this was my first show. At that point, I had a few stops under my belt on the World Series, and the World Series is a carnival. So you're kind of set up for it. But I was backing up Morgan Williams, so I didn't have a lot of ice time. There wasn't too much pressure on me, thank goodness. But fast forwarding to taking Mexico to 2 multi-sport games, and then Canada to a few of them as well. And I've talked about it on a few other episodes, all I do is try and manage the players' emotions and limit distractions and let them enjoy the experience as much as possible and keep things super simple, because the occasion can really beat you. And with all, we've been talking a lot about World Cups and Olympics with different coaches on here, and just what their plans are to set their athletes up for success. So for me, through my negative and positive experiences, I just try to learn from all of them and then pay it forward to the next generation of players, and now the next generation of coaches. So, I think, all your experiences, positive or negative, are just, what's probably helped shape you as a coach, right? So let's just back up about Sluggo and Spence. What were a couple of highlights of those guys?
The way I really got to know both of them was they were coaching us at the Canada Under-23s in Kingston. So we were there for a month. And what I remember about Sluggo, like, huge heart, sense of humor, dry sense of humor at times. There's just, anybody looking back, there would be a number of things that come vividly to mind. And for me, one of them is the blithe attitude in which he threw the tackle suits at us on the hard Kingston ground. And he said, "It's all right. The boys were training and puking in them this morning, but I've hosed them off, so chuck those on." And we were like, yeah, that's maybe the scent of the summer. You're laughing because you can imagine that, because it's true. What a guy, like, in terms of his heart and his energy and his passion, his players, especially when he passed, was proportionate exactly to the way he affected us all and impacted us all. And he was tough, like tough as nails, to an extent that you wanted to be that and to measure up to that. And for me, those are qualities like passion and toughness that, as a Canadian, I guess maybe we value those, because that's our hockey literacy as well. Like that's our sport literacy, things that we prize of many things, and Sligo embodied those. And then for me, Spence, again, like boundless energy, boundless curiosity, like wanted to know and learn from everybody, and drives you. So he's a very driven man. He drives fire trucks as a job. And that's sort of the pace at which he approaches training and life and self-improvement, and challenging you to do likewise. So I've always enjoyed that. I remember being filthy when he pulled me off the field. We were beating Stanford, maybe Rob, by about 50 points or something. He pulled me off the field with maybe 30 minutes left in the game so that Becky Swan could get on for 30 minutes of the thing. And I was filthy at him. And I genuinely had a breakdown at him later. And he's, Les, you are an emotional superstar. You need to accept there are other people on these teams. So I loved the way he used to keep it real, because I was completely OTT in a lot of ways that I approached the game. But like, he's the one that gave me the appetite to coach and to use that as an avenue to learn more about the game myself. So I started coaching when I was a player to make myself a better player, and to have access to the clubhouse keys and the bag of 20 balls to go and throw lineouts like that. It was all very selfishly motivated, but he was the one that kept pushing me through a variety of career choices and decisions. I usually call him and just check in. And then he tells me, if it's going to stretch you and you're going to grow out of it, you should probably do it. Yeah, I owe both of those so much, those men, and especially Spence, because he's a real nurturer for me at UBC with what I wanted to do with the game.
I definitely spoke about Sligo in length, and he cut me for 7 years, but it wouldn't be me. I wouldn't be without getting cut for 7 years. And he was also my biggest fan. He liked having a little dog he could kick and get barking at all the big boys. But Spence was kind of my guy behind the scenes too. Very special man. He was one of the coaches and selectors, but he'd always pull me aside and looked out for me. Just class. And I'll just share a story. I was coaching Canada at the FISU games this year in Naples, and his son Jonah. Yeah, so he was my captain. I got to coach him there, and so Spence was there. So Spence coached me at the Commonwealth Games. So full circle, it was pretty cool, and it triple stamped that I'm now old, because now I'm so that's crazy. But let's just talk about your transition into coaching and your time working with UBC.
I spent a while at UBC, as many tend to, especially in the rugby program. So I managed to squeeze in a master's while I was there, but I didn't go about it in a very snappy way, either the undergrad or the master's. So I definitely lingered. A lot of that was to do with rugby. It's nice that you can say I had national team duties on the side just to make it look a little bit more legit, but I meandered a bit. And one of those was my first season down in Wellington in New Zealand, 2008. I was still doing a master's, but I knew with the World Cup coming up in a couple of years from now, like I needed to do something to change my game, and I needed to do something to change myself and how I saw things as a person. UBC had sort of broached the subject with me prior to me leaving for that season. Like, we're looking for a head coach. I'd done some assistant coaching. I'd done some second division coaching. And they said, there's going to be a vacancy for head coach at the start of next school year. And at that point, it was one of those things where it just looks like a big step and too big a step, and you run into the step rather than get onto the step. And so it was something that took a few phone conversations with Spence while I was down in Wellington, but it ended up being that I went down there as a player with sort of the dual intention of learning about coaching or learning how to coach. And I thought in my wisdom in my youth that I would be able to do that in the 3 months that I spent down there in a visitor visa. So playing rugby down there, playing rugby league, put me in a community of people with some access to some reasonably heavy hitters. Like, this is how we would see them in Canada and elsewhere. They're just, someone's uncle or your coach or, guy that puts post pads up at the club. But Ken Laban, who does some broadcasting as well as coaching and yelling at us, he's a wonderful man. He's a huge man in my life. he put me in touch with Richard Watt at Punake, and he was club coaching at the time. He's since been Hurricanes forwards coach. He was there for, I think, 9 years. And Alama Iramiya, who was just back from Japan. So I used to trot around after those guys with notes, like teeny tiny little notes scrunched up in a pen, and just write down everything and draw everything. And honestly, if I hadn't done that, and if sort of my Uncle Ken hadn't said, get along and do your homework, I would have been up the creek when I returned to UBC. But it gave me enough confidence that I could sort of self-structure a practice. And I had access to people, and I could say, how do I do this? Because one thing I've always been sure of is that I don't want to do things the way that they've been done, because I know that there are better ways to do it. And to be able to start piecing those bits of information together in a different environment was really stimulating for me. So when I went back in 2008, I was still with the national team. And so that was partially funding me, but the other partial funding came from coaching at UBC. And for me, that enabled me to make rugby my full time at a really impoverished sort of level. It was the best start I probably could have had in coaching, to be honest.
I had a huge takeaway from you when I was fortunate enough to coach with you and help out with your sevens prep. And that was the pre-session coffee. So, before every session, Lesley had a, coffee shop staked out, like tucked away. You'd have to been at UBC for 15 years like her to know where this coffee shop was, Dallen, because I get lost every time. But I'd be met with an extra large grande every time, and to this day, like that's my go-to. If we're gonna with all my coaches, we got to go. So that was my expert tip for all those coaches out there. And I'll just share one story. So we're running a 7 session. We're doing non-contact. Leslie's like, we have a 15s game tomorrow, or it was like they had a 15s game the next day or in a couple of days. Like, let's not do contact. I'm like, okay, we'll just do some simple evasion. So down, we had these 2 girls, and they were both models. Like, they were both actually models. They were paid models. Non-contact evasion, the defender's just jogging straight, and the ball carrier has to run, make a move. Anyway, full-on collision. They both break their nose, like smash, blood everywhere. I'm like, what is happening? What is happening? That was like my first session at UBC. So thanks for the coffee. Sorry about the injuries.
Thanks for the reminder of that. I know exactly who you're talking about. We won't speak about it. I remember the blood, and just, it was...
It's the only time in my coaching career in 26 years I've ever experienced anything like it. So
a low-speed, non-contact training where you have somehow a high-impact collision. Yeah, dude, I remember that actually. Thank you for bringing that back. And thank you for bringing back that coffee, because that's an important part of my coaching ritual now, and all my staff know it. So I think it's important to salute where that comes from.
Well, he only drinks about 15 a day, so the problem is getting larger.
It's not actually that special a ritual for you. That's cool.
You started him on the path. Let's go back to your journey as a coach. You then moved back to New Zealand. Tell us about some of the roles you had there and your journey.
I think it was 3 seasons at UBC all up, and they were really, really rich for me in terms of the latitude that I had from the athletics department and the buy-in that I had from the players to make changes and try things. So it was fantastic. We were sort of given a lot of rein, not a lot of budget. And what that does is it just forces you and enables you to be creative about how you do things. I loved that. And it was sort of the mindset that I needed, because the next opportunity for me, Wellington Rugby had a job come up. And it was one of the first women's development jobs. It was certainly the first in New Zealand, and it was one of the sort of new wave of people who get paid to try and fix some problems and reinvigorate the women's game. So Wellington Rugby, I got an email just saying like, hey, Canada, what are you up to next year? We might have a job come up. What are you doing? And literally, it doesn't speak much for my career prospects. I did a master's in classics, Dallen, so there was some options on the table, but they weren't anything to keep you in Canada. And I had the email in my BlackBerry that's saying like, hey, yeah, everything's gone through. And literally I was on my way to the airport when that came through. So I had my suitcase packed, and I was just like, well, see you later, family. Like, I'm off. And just 100% crossing fingers, trusting to God knows what, and got on the plane after a conversation with a really crazy guy at New Zealand immigration saying like, oh yeah, no, that sounds good. Because she's like, do you have a visa? I'm like, no, like I am not a grown up. I don't know anything about this. Everything worked out and I got down there, and within maybe 2 months I had a visa and I had a job, and all their piecemeal funding came together. And that was a state of sort of the women's game at the time. They were committed to doing something about it. They didn't know what, and they had no money to do it. So they had to like throw all these tiny grants together. When I started in Wellington, like I had a sort of pre-existing community that I knew because I'd played and kept in touch. And I'd only been away maybe 2 years. So actually 1 year. But in the women's game, a lot of people had sort of long-standing, not axes to grind, but there are things that just eat away at people when they see a lot of resource given towards the men's game and they have daughters and their kids are passionate, and there's still real inequalities, but it's just sort of a point of infancy in terms of getting athletes into the game early at grassroots level and providing something for them. So it was all about, again, very little resource, lots of creativity, lots of people with passion and drive, but then starting to build a framework from which you could start developing the girls and women's game in the region. So that was really interesting, and it was challenging and it was rewarding, and it was maddening at times. Like I took a bus to Palmerston North with, it would have been about 40 girls from 9 to 13 on the bus, and there was a microphone and they found it, and all their parents are safely in the cars following you behind the bus, and like that was memorable. But after probably 3 years, the appeal of trying to fix the same problems and change the same problems had shifted, and I went for a Heartland development officer job. So in Wanganui, which is where I finished in New Zealand, I did 3 years as a development officer, so coach, player, game development in the Heartland, which was great. And it took me back it felt a little bit like home, sort of mountains, smaller town, very rural, hunting, logging, farming, gumboots to work. So that was definitely felt like a bit of a homecoming after many years in city in Vancouver and then many years in Wellington. It was really cool to get back there.
I find it so interesting how you had the opportunity and, it came on your BlackBerry and you got it and you went there because, rugby in New Zealand, it's the envy of, all the other playing nations. And the New Zealand have the highest number of coaches that they export to other countries. So the fact that you got to go as a Canadian to coach there, that's such a unique experience. The same thing can be said also for your stint, how you went back and forth to Japan. So let's touch on that. How did that opportunity unfold? Because before you moved there, they had already recruited you to come coach some sevens, right?
Yeah. It was another sort of mystery email showed up in the inbox, and I kind of thought, this surely isn't for me. This must be for, do you know what I do and what I don't do? So just from Kensuke Iwabuchi here, who's the national teams director, he'd sort of done homework on who was coaching in New Zealand in the women's game, and the credit to them, at Japan, they're very proactive about promoting women's coaching in the game. So had done homework around women coaches, and that's where I got an email saying, we're looking for someone to coach our sevens program. And that felt like a really exciting, exotic, all of those things, thrilling. But my last experience genuinely with sevens had been as a player, club tournament at MSP in Wellington, as a manager and as a coach, and all of those things did not really point me towards any kind of assurance or confidence around it. So I did end up I did drag my feet a little bit. But Kelly McCallum, who's another Canadian, former coach of Japan women, former Canadian captain, one of my really good friends, she lives in Whangarei now in Northland, teaches at Auckland AUT, and she had sort of pushed them towards me, and I felt like I'd better buck up and do it. So I said, yes, absolutely. It sounds amazing. And then I came over here and just January camp in the middle of Tokyo at the military base with 40 players, and talk about sort of groping around for the right approach to take to it. I had no experience with the sensibility here or the respect that they afford a foreign coach, for example, that they've invited to come in. So I was looking for cues and signals what do you want, and trying to be collaborative and trying to engage and get where they were very much about you know best, you need to drive this. And so what what a long week that was. Like, it was so fun, but such a long week in terms of trying to suss out and get a template for a successful coaching experience. What do they want? But we all enjoyed each other's company enough to the extent that, and I could sort of build up around their contact areas, that they started bringing me back on the regular as somebody who could teach sort of the front and back ends of contact. And that was probably a more comfortable fit for me. So I did that for a year on and off, coming out of Wanganui, out of the Palmy airport. And then March 2018, I moved over here. Like, again, just chucked all the bags on the plane and pulled into the Palmerston North airport parking lot, God knows what time in the morning, and like throwing money at them, trying to get my extra baggage on the plane because I wanted to bring my books with me. Yeah, and the dog came over 3 weeks later, and here we are.
That's awesome. And it was good reconnecting at the 2018 Rugby Sevens World Cup, and to have a couple Canadian coaches randomly who had a few stints coaching together and maybe celebrating together in younger years, coming full circle in San Francisco was pretty special. And I was, obviously just so proud of you, and it's more than the game, really. So how was that experience for you being at that World Cup with Japan?
I wasn't meant to go. Like, initially they were only going to take sort of head coach S&C. So I loved getting to go because I pushed. And I think some of the girls pushed a little bit as well. Like, we had done a lot of work on building some integrity in their contact. So we'd been doing some wrestle sessions, and we had been doing some really specific work around building the confidence and building the intention to go through, like, when it's inevitable, to just bust rather than get away. And like, as well as I do, you've got to be able to win collisions. That requires trust, and that requires like really building their confidence to a point where in a sport, in a country where that's not coached, it's avoided more often than it is coached. I have no qualms about saying that. That was a really big thing for those girls mentally. So that was, I think, the tipping point for the reason that I was eventually brought along. So it was really cool for me because I was there with very few actual responsibilities. Like, I did a little bit here and there, but I just got to go and watch and marvel at the atmosphere. Like, I'd never been, unlike you, to a sevens tournament in any kind of capacity apart from watching. So it was beautiful. Like, I loved, this is not news to anybody who's been really heavily involved with sevens, such as yourselves, but for somebody from the doer gray world of 15s, it was very exciting. Some great coffee in San Francisco as well. It's a great city.
Yeah, I couldn't pick a better venue. So just looking back to your pre-COVID days, for those listeners out there, what does a week in a life look like for your athletes and for you as a coach?
Oh, that's a good question. We're together for about a week out of every month, 5 days out of every month. And I will usually see them 1 or 2 more days because we'll do a bit of a traveling get around, and we'll go and we'll do a wrestle session, which is, again, we're talking about bringing those combat skills and those contact literacies to the forefront of our game. So I spend time getting around to do that. I have been busier in COVID than I have out of COVID because all of that coaching that you condense into a week at camp now gets spread across. How do we do it? How do we meet? I'm at home quite a bit no matter what. So like, my lifestyle hasn't changed too appreciably other than the onslaught that is Zoom in everybody's life. But I'm really lucky in that I can get up, or it's hot if it's the summertime. The dog and I get down through the parks, through the river. We go for a swim. I'm sure the water is god-awful questionable, but like, it doesn't matter because it's blue and it's cold, and that does matter because it gets bloody hot around here. Too hot for Canadians. That's the early morning, have a coffee, get back, and then it's all about sort of processing how I'm going to approach the next 6 months or the next 3-month piece, and then break that into something that the girls can digest in terms of language and in terms of what they already know about the game. So it's been a really gradual building process. We started right from the very basics because I'm a control freak at the start of January 2019, and have been layering the game up to now. And that's going to continue with obviously next World Cup being the end point. But at no moment have I been able to really relax. I'm just conscious that there's limited time and we have to get as much information in as measured and as tactical a sort of intake as possible.
The Japanese don't have the size, but the coachability and sense of team and selflessness is better than anywhere in the world. I love watching Japan play men, women at any level, 7s or 15s. Can you give us some insight what the women's leagues are like across Japan?
So because Tokyo has been looming for years now, there's been a lot of money and company money directed into putting women's sevens teams on the park. There's a really well-resourced, really well-attended women's sevens circuit. So the Taiyo Seimei series is a really big draw. That's the one that overseas players go and play in, get contracts for. They bring in outside coaches. I think it's televised. I haven't got a TV here because it would just drive me nuts. That's sort of the golden child of the women's game over here. And then the 15s game is underdeveloped. It's undersubscribed. There's only a couple of programs that have a full 15 side. So there's only a couple of teams that will enter that will actually field their own team, and others are just composites. Not just composites, because that takes a lot of work, but others are composites of 2, 3, even 4 different sevens programs, which comes at a cost, obviously, to the quality of the game that they can play, the coaching they receive. You know as well as I do, that would become sort of a management process rather than any kind of coaching process. And that, as much as anything, is why we had to peel it right back at the start of last year. On one hand, it's a blank slate. You know, they're not going to certainly question me like, Lesley, I don't think this is the way to do things. But we are actually working towards building that into the culture. So we're working at building up a game, but also building up a player culture and a team and program culture that is going to be resilient and going to be able to voice opinions and going to be able to challenge each other in a safe and honest environment that feels progressive. And those are lessons that I've taken from my World Cup experiences, like we talked about earlier. Those are also sometimes dynamics that don't occur naturally, to put it lightly, in the Japanese culture, and especially coming from a Japanese school system and sports system where it's immensely top-down. It's a really big challenge, and it's why I think about rugby all the time. So it's why, like, this is my number one obsession in my head, is just how I can get this program to next year and get some success for them. So it's really interesting. Like, I love it. It's why I love rugby. It's just such a challenge mentally.
Speaking of challenges, so I've been to Japan a couple of times, had brilliant visits, amazing people. I just couldn't communicate with them, which is unfortunate. How are you finding that, the language barrier, and do you speak Japanese now?
I would speak it if you asked my mother. So, like, anyone who comes to visit me is amazed and impressed by me trotting out my phrases, but like I would be helpless if I ventured off a certain path in terms of like, I need to do this. There's no chance. So at a certain point, I will always give up and call my manager. She will translate. Because I live, like, you can get by in Tokyo no problem and never speak a word of Japanese. You can speak English everywhere. But in Kumagaya and Saitama, there's very, 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 very few people who speak English, almost entirely Japanese here. And so my small talk is off the charts at the moment. Like, my path to the river every day that the dog and I walk is, there's old people everywhere, and they get out for their morning airing. And like, we have a social circle now of very old people who love to talk about how good the dog is, how nice the weather is, how cold the weather is. So like, I can kill the small talk, and then that is it. On the field, we use a lot of rugby language. So a lot of their words for rugby are the same in English, but the trap that you get sometimes caught in as a coach is when they say it and you say it, you do not picture the same thing. And then that drives me nuts. And then we have to think, do we change the word, or do we come up with a different word for it? Or stick with a word and then come up with something else? That's ongoing excitement when you realize that you're not speaking the same language, even though you're saying the same words. But the girls know, like, we've had the discussion in camp a lot about the fact that the better they are at speaking English, the more they're going to be able to be in command and control of their own experiences when they go overseas. Like, that's a really big thing for them, is not feeling isolated and feeling they have a confidence when they go away as a player, whether it's individually to go and play for a different club or different team, or as a group can they go and express themselves and engage? One of the probably saddest things and one of the most impactful things I heard from my first camp when I came to Tokyo in January, when I was just coming over as a spot coach, I talked to a lot of the senior girls before everybody departed from the camp. They wanted to do a bit of a question and answer with me. And I also wanted to question them. And I said, like, look, a bunch of you just been to Rio. Tell me about that. How was that? I've never been to Olympics. I'm all ears. And one of the first things they said to me was, we felt like all the other teams had more fun than us. And we felt like they were isolated and they couldn't enjoy things and they couldn't communicate. And I just thought, like, what a thing to color your experience, and what a way to feel at one of the biggest events of your life, that you actually can't go outside of your bubble, to use a COVID term, and go and engage with the others. Like, that's how we all pump the Olympic tires. We say that's what's important, and then we're not giving them the tools to do it. So really important for me that we practice the language wherever we go. So when we were in Italy, for example, we all had some Italian lessons. I made some of the girls get up and teach some Italian, and we all practice our buongiornos in the morning, and it was great. So that's something I push as much as the rugby is that ownership of your communication.
I think that's so important. You know, well, obviously I work in communication, but that's absolutely brilliant. Can you give us a couple of phrases, actually, some rugby terminology, things that you would tell your team?
Oh, I always get asked for this. I always feel on the spot, and then, okay. We do a lot in English, Dallen.
Oh, come on. Give us something, and you can make it up. We would have no idea.
Oh, I know. Somebody out there will be like, that's not what they say. Okay. The first ones that I learned, actually, I'll tell you. The first ones I learned, shugo to mizu kudasai. So everybody come in and we'll have some water. I was really deliberate about what I would learn how to say. So moto hageshiku, moto hageshi kudasai is more violent. Do it more violently, please. Because I wanted to be really specific about my language, so that they, like, I only know a few words. They're going to be very, very clear on what's important to me. So moto hageshiku, moto hayaku is faster, moto hageshiku, more violent. Yasashi sugi means you're too soft, too nice, too soft. Those were the first words, but like I've evolved as a human since then, and I'm actually more.
Well, I think Sluggo is living in the dark places in your brain. I know, just relatability, working with the Mexican women's culture, as far as, liberating them, empowering them, building a winning culture, telling them it's okay to win and all that too. But language wise, the girls would harass me early on that I wasn't learning Spanish. I wasn't speaking Spanish. So when I took over as head coach after flying in and out, kind of like you had with Japan, that this is important, if I'm going to be a part of this country. And so I'd work on it, and then I would use it, pissing themselves laughing. So I said, don't make fun of me. It's your, if my Spanish is not developing, it's on you girls. You girls have to educate me. I'm educating you on the field. So then commitment wise, it grew. But when I was on the zone, I was fine on the field, but off the field, I wasn't as confident. But that's Japanese is definitely a bigger fish to bite off.
A world apart. It sounds like nothing you've ever. But one of my vice captain and I, she's one of the senior girls. We spend an hour on Zoom. Usually ends up 2 hours on Zoom every week, and then we trade language back and forth. So I'm learning Japanese from her, and she's working on her English because she's planning to go play in the Premiership in England when the season kicks off. So I've told her if she goes over there, she can't speak English, she's not going to get enough out of it, and I'm going to beat her to death when she gets back.
That's brilliant. I'm helping Rob with his English as well, because the Canadian accent is a bit different. We all have funny ones. But I will say, though, you're a special guest, because I think you have like 3 accents combined in one, right?
Yeah. Every time speaking on the phone, hearing myself in voice notes, it is just atrocious. It is a much of a thing. And I apologize to everyone.
Fort Nelson, Vancouver, and then New Zealand, and now a hint of Japanese, maybe.
It's unbelievably, yeah. I apologize unreservedly.
No, it's great. Let's actually talk about the Rugby World Cup. We mentioned it earlier, Japan hosting and being such a brilliant nation to put on a spectacle. What was your experience like during that time? You said you're in Kumagayo, and what effect did it have on particularly the women's game in Asia?
When Japan beat Ireland, I sent Jamie Joseph a text in the hour, and I'm sure a million other people did, but I just said, honestly, like, thank you so much for what you've just done for us, because they provided a shortcut in an arena where you don't have shortcuts. Like, shortcuts are never given to you in terms of inspiring a team to belief and like surety that they can get outcomes that they would never have aspired to. So it was massive, massive for us. We were in camp very shortly afterwards, and to be able to leverage some of our discussions off of what the men were in the middle of achieving was vital, because you can train and you can prepare, but if they don't have that belief internally and as a group, they're never going to give you enough on the field that is going to get them the results that you're wanting. So like the lever that pulled the chute for us to be able to go over to Italy and Scotland in November and come back with a draw and a win was certainly the men's performances at the World Cup. And it was something that I don't ever want to forget, sort of how important Eddie Jones's work was towards the 2015 World Cup, because that was the absolute base of everything that Japanese rugby has achieved since then internationally, was the lengths that he went to change the perception of what you could do to prepare for rugby and that what the Japanese people could accomplish. So like for them to beat South Africa, so Dallen, laid the foundation for the anticipation of everyone in the sport here. What's next? So not even, ooh, we can do it. It wasn't even that. It's more a sense of like, right, what's next? So it's that intention and that hunger has been set. And for the girls, that's a different dynamic because they come from a very different background. They come with fewer training years, and they come from a culture that's very, very gendered still in a way they approach a lot of things. Like without that moment from the World Cup, which was, I just have to say, it was like the best thing I've ever been to as a spectator. It was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. I've never been properly to a World Cup before, and it was just the most fun I've had and the most joy that you could just imagine, especially seeing people walk through the streets of my city to watch the games. It was just cool, like Georgians, Tongans.
It was unbelievable. So I got a chance to do 10 games, commentate them, pool games. Yeah, so we did the southern region of Japan, Kobe, and all the way down. And I got a chance to work with some really quality international folks that I looked up to as a youngster from South Africa, Joel Stransky, who kicked the winning kick for South Africa in 95. So outside of that, my favorite thing was seeing the Japanese arrive at the stadium 5 hours, 6 hours before the game is started, lining up to drive by the gear and sails. And I did one Japanese game. It was when they beat Samoa. They had to score 4 tries to get a bonus point, and they did it in the 81st minute. The 40,000 crowd erupted. They went mental. It was on my all-time favorite events I've ever been to. And that game with Japan, I didn't get a chance to go to the other ones because we were working, but it was still a highlight and will be forever.
Like, I think everyone will say that. Everyone will say that they came to Japan for it. The enthusiasm and the jubilation in all of Japan. It was funny because 2 to 3 weeks beforehand, I was very concerned. I'm like, do they know this is happening? Like, it wasn't that sense of anticipation or the number of posters that you would expect for like a massive event. And then things just went, it just blossomed. It was awesome. So cool.
Well, Japan is on my hit list of places. Japan and Fiji are the 2 places that are my dream boats to go to. So I'll be looking you up soon. Just circling back, you talked about the impact Eddie Jones made, and I don't know if you've looked at it, but not to discredit your era as a player at UBC or as a coach, but since you've left, you laid the ground. You laid the groundwork as a player and coach for now what is one of the top programs in the country. And UBC was always competitive, but now they've got close to, I don't know, 50, 60 women going into that program. They got funds, the resources, the facilities. And then just looking at the Canadian program, you talked about the struggles in 2006 and 2010. They finished second in the world in 2014, and that's not to be undone by your era and the year before. So, I know you're as humble pie as it gets from Fort Nelson. For those future women, the groundwork that you've laid out before you left these shores is a strong legacy, and you should be proud of that.
Thank you. I feel like a small cog in a lot of cogs and gears and whatnot. Spoken like a true art student, but I was really lucky to be around a lot of impressive people and come before a lot of impressive people and after as well. So,
and now transitioning into the world of Japan, and one of your roles is to promote the game across the country. And what programs do you have in place for that, and how successful has it been so far?
I'm lucky in that I can finally just focus on putting the women's national team together. So you feel like a real dog and pony show when you're in the game, in game development. And like, I know everybody working in that job description around the world will feel me when I say, like, as a game development officer or a rugby development officer. So for example, when I was in Wellington, when I was in Wanganui, even when I was a coach at UBC, and you have to constantly be like clashing these cymbals and banging that drum and trying to make it all come together, here I can finally just focus on one program going forward. And that's not to say that I don't have other reaches in terms of I do, like you say, I need to build the profile of the game, and I need to build the framework that girls see when they envision a national team future for them. I don't do as much as I've thought I was going to be engaged in. Like, I don't have to go and do coaching clinics. And I do go and do coaching clinics when the opportunity arises, but it's not a frequent thing. So what I can do is make sure that I'm out watching everything, and I need to go and watch everything because there's no real TID system in place. We're putting together a TID department now, and that's really helpful. And Kaz Futawatari, who used to coach at UBC, same time as me, he's been working for JRFU for a couple of years now. So he's going to help head up that TID program. He works with me with the national team program. So to be able to put people around me that are very good at what they do, and very intelligent and very passionate about growing the game is such a wonderful change from having to try and do all that myself. Then I can just try and focus on my job, which I love. But I think the better we can do on the international stage, the better we will do for the sport.
Success breeds success, and good leaders surround themselves by better people and empower them. You got a good plan in place there. Now, listen, we're getting close. This is the last question, but you're as humble as it gets. We have a lot of listeners, and I've been fortunate enough to, like yourself, travel around the world. And small Cowichan Valley guy, that's a forever dreamer. I try and empower a lot of boys and girls around the world. And what would you say to those young kids out there, swimming in puddles and climbing hills that have ambitions to conquer whatever their dreams are?
I would say, like, that's the best preparation for any path you want to take. If you have a wide enough road that leaves you room to wander and meander and stop and have a look at things, like, that's the most important thing, is not to panic because you're not getting somewhere. It may not look like the itinerary that you planned with the stops that you planned. It might be slower or it might be faster, but you have the latitude to do what you find joy in, and you have the room on your path to stop and enjoy things, or to work ahead, or even to track back. There's no judgment process on that. I think as long as you've got your compass points, which is the things that you're passionate about, those are the things that are going to be the North Star, if you will. Like, that's what's going to drive you to where you're going. And then just leave yourself room on the road. Like, I've taken some wicked detours as a player. I've done, sort of goofy things that my coaches would never have said yes to, but I've said yes to because they challenged me as a person, or they intrigued me sort of mentally. So be kind to yourself about where you're going and how fast you want to get there. Make sure your road's pointed in the direction that you love, with a wide path.
I like the wide path. Brilliantly said. It was such a thrill for us to have a former international player turned international coach on the Rugby Hive. Arigato, Lesley.
Oh, domo. It was a real pleasure, and I don't know how to say that in Japanese. Thank you so much.
Beautiful ball over the top. Yes, Seppo!
Thank you for listening, you sleek sensations.
If you haven't already, please subscribe to Rugby Hive Podcast and catch us on all the socials at Rugby Hive.
We appreciate your support. Be safe out there, and we'll see you soon.
They've taken the lunch money from South